Target tilde 4,900-5,000 words. A boot slammed into a garage door and it buckled inward. The old rusted metal screamed on its track. A big man shoved his shoulder against it and forced the gap wider. Inside, something moved in the dark. A low growl rolled out from behind a workbench. Then a shape limped forward, 4 legs, one of them dragging, old eyes, bared teeth. The man froze with his hand still on the door. He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't back away either. He just stood there, breathing hard, staring down at a dog that should have been dead 20 years ago. His name was Deacon Mercer. Everybody in that town used to call him Dutch. And he had just walked out of prison 3 days before. Who had fed this animal for 2 decades inside a building that nobody was supposed to own. Stay with me on this one. Dutch didn't move. Neither did the dog. They stood there in that gap of gray light, 2 old fighters sizing each other up. And then Dutch did something he hadn't planned. He crouched down, slow. His knees cracked like dry wood. He held out one hand, palm up, the way you do when you want an animal to smell you and decide for itself whether you're worth biting. The growl stopped. The dog's nose twitched. Once. Twice. Then the ears came up and something changed in those old eyes. The tail gave one uncertain thump against the concrete. The dog took a step, then another, and then it pressed its whole scarred head into Dutch's open hand like it had been waiting to do that its entire life. "Diesel," Dutch whispered. His voice broke on the word. "No. No, that's not possible." But it was him. The gray muzzle, the notch missing from the left ear, the white blaze that ran crooked down his chest. This was the pup Dutch had pulled out of a drainage ditch the summer before everything fell apart. A shepherd mix with a bad hip and a worse attitude. Dutch had named him Diesel because he never quit running. Now let me back up, because none of this makes sense unless you know who this man was. 20 years earlier, Deacon Mercer had been the road captain of a motorcycle club that ran the length of eastern Ohio. He was the man who rode point, the one who decided where they stopped and when they moved. He was built like a side of beef, and he had a reputation for 2 things. 1, he never started a fight. 2, he never lost one. Men crossed the street when Dutch came walking down it. Not because he was cruel, because he was certain. There's a difference, and everybody who met him felt it. He ran a little shop on the edge of Ember Falls. Mercer and Sons Cycle Repair, though there was no father in it and only 2 sons. Dutch and his kid brother, Wesley. Wes was 10 years younger and half Dutch's size. Skinny arms, glasses held together with tape, a laugh that came out too loud in a quiet room. Where Dutch was all muscle and menace, Wes was all patience. Give him a dead engine and a weekend and he'd have it singing. He idolized his big brother, followed him around that garage like a second shadow, handing him wrenches before he even asked. There was something about the 2 of them together that people in Ember Falls used to remark on. Dutch would come stomping through the front door of the diner, and every head would turn, and then little Wes would come trailing in behind him with an oil rag in his back pocket and a grin that didn't fit his face, and the whole diner would kind of soften. The old-timers at the counter used to joke that Wes was Dutch's translator, that the big man didn't need words because his brother had enough for both of them. And it was true in a way. Dutch would nod at a thing and Wes would explain it. Dutch would growl at a customer and Wes would smooth it out. That's how the shop had run. 2 brothers, 1 voice. And then came the night that ended it. There was a fight outside a roadhouse off Route 9. A man Dutch had never met threw a bottle at a woman, and Dutch stepped in the way he always did. It should have ended there. But the man came at him with a knife, and there was a scuffle, and when it was over, the man was dead on the gravel with his own blade in his chest. The law called it manslaughter. Dutch called it Tuesday. He never once said what really happened out there. Never named the 3rd man who'd been holding that knife first. He took the 20 years, and he took them quiet, because talking wasn't in him. The last thing he did before the marshals loaded him into the van was look back at Weeze standing in the courthouse doorway, 22 years old, crying like a boy half that age. And Dutch had mouthed 3 words at him, just 3, "Take care of it." He meant the shop, he meant the dog, he meant keep the lights on until I'm home. Then the door closed, and for 20 years Dutch heard nothing. No letters got through, or so he believed. No visits. Ember Falls was a 6-hour drive from the prison, and the years just piled up like snow nobody shoveled. Dutch made his peace with the idea that his brother had moved on, sold the shop, built a life somewhere else with a wife and kids and a mortgage. That's what Dutch had wanted for him. He'd have been furious if Weeze had wasted himself waiting. That's what he told himself anyway. On the harder nights, alone on the bunk with the yard lights buzzing outside, he'd catch himself hoping the opposite. Hoping that when he finally rolled home, some part of the old life would still be there. Then morning would come and he'd shove that hope back down. Hope was a dangerous thing to carry in a place like that. So when Dutch finally rolled back into town on a borrowed bus ticket and $40 in his pocket, he came expecting nothing. He walked the 2 miles from the depot with his whole life in a paper sack. He expected to find the garage torn down or turned into a taco stand or just gone. He came to say goodbye to a place, not to find it breathing. Instead, he found a locked door with rust on the hinges, and behind it, waiting, a dog that knew his name. Now the dog leaned against his leg and shook, whole body trembling, and Dutch felt the panic rise in him. "Who's been feeding you, huh?" He ran his hands over the animal's ribs, not starved, thin, old, but not starved. There was a water bowl by the workbench filled recently. A bag of feed open propped against the wall. Somebody had been here for years. Dutch stood up and looked at the garage for the first time, and that's when the whole story turned. The place wasn't dead, it was sleeping. The tools still hung on their pegboard, oiled and rust-free, each one in its outline the way Dutch used to keep them. The floor was swept. The old radio still sat on the shelf. There was a calendar on the wall, and Dutch walked toward it slow, and his heart started hammering because the calendar was current. This year, this month, somebody had flipped it just weeks ago. He turned in a slow circle. The overhead bulb still had the same little chain pull with the brass fish on the end that Weeze had bought at a yard sale when he was 15. The workbench still had the burn mark from the time Dutch had set down a hot manifold on the wood. Somebody had kept every one of those details alive on purpose. Somebody had walked in and out of this shop for 2 decades and refused to change a single thing. And then his eyes landed on the far wall. There was something big under a canvas tarp, bolted up on a wall mount like a trophy. Dutch crossed the floor. Diesel followed, that bad leg scraping. Dutch took the corner of the tarp in his fist. He stood there a second, not sure he wanted to see. Then he pulled. The canvas slid down and pooled on the floor, and Dutch made a sound that wasn't a word. It was his chopper, his bike. The one he'd wrecked the night of the fight, the one that had gone down in the gravel and folded like a soda can, frame bent, tank crushed, front end snapped clean off. He'd left it a heap of scrap in the corner of this very shop. He remembered the sound it made when it hit. He'd figured it went to the junkyard decades ago, but here it was, rebuilt, every inch of it, the frame straightened and welded and powder-coated black. The tank hammered back into shape and painted the same deep candy red it wore in 1998. New chrome, new leather, new everything. It gleamed under the dust like it had rolled off the line yesterday. Somebody had spent years on this. Years and money and a kind of love Dutch didn't have a name for. His hands were shaking now, both of them. He reached out and touched the seat, and underneath the edge of it he felt something, paper. A thick bundle of it tucked up under the leather where the springs met the frame. He pulled it out. It was a stack of envelopes, dozens of them, held together with a fat rubber band that snapped when he touched it, gone brittle with age. And there was a book, a ledger cloth bound, the corners soft from handling. Dutch opened the cover with one finger. The handwriting hit him before the words did. It was Wesley's, that same cramped, careful hand that used to label every parts drawer in the shop. Dutch would have known it anywhere. The first page had a date at the top, October 1998, 3 weeks after Dutch went inside, and under the date, one line. Started today, $12, it's not much, but I'm keeping it for you and I'm not going to stop. Dutch's legs went out from under him. He sat down hard on an overturned crate. Diesel put his head on Dutch's knee. He turned the page, then another. It was a savings ledger, every entry in Wesley's hand. A date, a job, a dollar amount. Rebuilt a carburetor, $8 set aside. Tuned a Harley for a guy in Youngstown, $20 set aside. Winter, slow, only $4 this week, sorry. Page after page after page. 20 years of a man wrenching in a garage and skimming a little off the top of every job. Not for himself, for his brother, for the day he came home. At the bottom of certain pages, Wes had written little notes. Fed Diesel, he misses you. Rebuilt your front end today. It was the hardest part. Cried a little. Don't tell anybody. Rent's due and I'm short, but I'll figure it out. Always do. One of them just read. Heard a song on the radio you would have liked. Save you a listen. Another one, on a page from a year Dutch couldn't remember what he'd been doing, said, Bad day. Missed you extra. Put in 15 instead of 12. Balancing the ledger for both of us. Dutch read until the words swam. Then he set the ledger down and he did the most human thing in the world. He laughed. Because for the first time in 20 years he wasn't alone. His brother had waited. His brother was out there somewhere close, and any minute now Dutch was going to walk out that door and find him. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. He looked around the shop and it didn't look like a tomb anymore. It looked like home. He filled the dog's bowl with fresh water. He found a rag and wiped a smear of dust off the gas tank, just to touch it, just to be doing something with his hands. He sat back down on the crate and let out a long, slow breath, the first easy breath he'd taken in 2 decades. All right, Wes, he said to the empty air. All right, I'm home. Where are you? And that's when he saw it. The last envelope in the stack was different from the others. The others were sealed, yellowed, old. This one was white, new. It sat on top where the rubber band had held it and Dutch had missed it in the rush. It had his name on the front in that same handwriting. Only the handwriting wasn't the same. It was shakier, weaker, like the hand that wrote it had lost its strength. And in the corner, a date, 3 weeks ago. Dutch went cold all over. He picked it up. His thumb tore the flap open, clumsy, and he unfolded a single sheet of paper. Dutch, if you're reading this, then you finally made it home. And I'm sorry I'm not there to open the door for you. I wanted to be. God, you have no idea how bad I wanted to hand you these keys myself. Dutch stopped breathing. The doctors found something in my lungs about a year ago, too far gone by the time they caught it. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you sitting in that cell worrying about me on top of everything else. That's my right as your little brother. I get to protect you for once. The paper was trembling so hard Dutch could barely read it. I made it as long as I could. I really tried to hang on till your date. But it turns out I'm not as tough as my big brother. Everything in this shop is yours. The bike, the money, all of it. It always was. Take care of Diesel. He's old and stubborn and he never gave up on you, not one single day. And neither did I. Come find me up on the hill when you're ready. Love, Wes. Dutch sat very still. The garage was silent. Even the dog had gone quiet. And then this enormous man, this road captain who'd never lost a fight in his life, folded up over that piece of paper and started to shake. Not crying at first, just shaking. Like his body was trying to reject what his eyes had read. His brother had waited 20 years. And he'd missed him by 21 days. I need you to sit with that for a second because Dutch had to. 20 years of a man saving $12 at a time, feeding a dog, rebuilding a wreck bolt by bolt. All of it aimed at one single moment, the moment he'd get to look his big brother in the eye and say, I kept it. I kept all of it. And that moment had come and gone 3 weeks before Dutch ever set foot in the door. If you're still with me here, and I hope you are, do me one favor. Hit that subscribe button. Stories like this one only get told if people stay to hear them out, and I've got a feeling you want to know what Dutch did next. Because he did do something. He didn't fall apart in that garage. Not for long. He stood up. He wiped his face one more time. He looked at the dog. He looked at the bike. And a cold, clear kind of calm came over him. The kind he used to get right before a fight, when everything went quiet and simple. Come on, he said to Diesel. Let's go see him. But he never made it to the hill that day. Because as he was folding the last letter back into his coat, headlights swept across the garage windows. A truck pulled into the lot outside. Then another. Doors slammed. And a man's voice, loud and bored, called out across the gravel. Anybody in there? This property's scheduled for clear-out. You got no business being here. Dutch stepped into the doorway and looked out. There were 4 of them. A foreman with a clipboard and a hard hat, and 3 men in work vests standing by a flatbed truck. Behind them, a shorter man in a gray suit that didn't belong within 50 miles of a place like this. The suit was checking his watch like the whole world was wasting his time. Shop's closed, the foreman said. County auctioned this lot last week. New owners clearing it Thursday. That's tomorrow. You need to be gone. Auctioned, Dutch said. Back taxes. Owner passed, nobody paid, county took it. The foreman shrugged. He wasn't cruel about it, just a man doing a job. Look, I'm sorry, whoever you are, but we got orders. Everything in that building gets hauled to scrap tomorrow morning, including that bike, I'd guess, if it's got any metal worth melting. And there it was. The story had changed shape again. 10 minutes ago this had been about grief, about a brother he'd lost and a goodbye he'd never get to say. Now it was about a machine, a cold county machine that didn't know Wesley Mercer's name, didn't care that a dying man had spent his last strength rebuilding a wreck for a brother in prison. To them the garage was a line on a spreadsheet and the bike was scrapped by the pound and Diesel was a stray to be called into the pound. The man in the gray suit stepped forward. You the brother, he said. The convict. Dutch didn't answer. I bought this lot, the man said. Whole block, actually, tearing it all down for a storage facility. Now the building's mine and legally everything in it's mine too, but I'm not a monster. You want the dog, take the dog. You got till morning to clear your personal effects. The bike stays. That's a fixture bolted to the wall it conveys with the property. My guys scrap it at 8. Dutch looked at him for a long moment. That bike's not for sale, Dutch said quietly. It's not for sale, friend. It's already sold, to me, with the building. The suit smiled a thin little smile. 8 a.m. You want to say goodbye to it, say it tonight. The trucks pulled out. The suit's taillights disappeared down the road, and Dutch stood in the doorway with his brother's letter in his coat and his brother's dog against his leg and the whole cold weight of it pressing down on him. 20 years, $12 at a time, and a man in a gray suit was going to melt it down for scrap at 8 in the morning. Dutch went back inside. He didn't sleep. He sat on the crate all night with the ledger open on his knees and read every single entry, all 20 years of them, front to back. Somewhere near the middle of that book, on a rainy November page from a year Dutch had spent in solitary, Weiss had written, hospital called. Diesel got hit by a truck. He's gonna limp forever. Vet bill was $200, paid out of my own pocket, not out of the fund. That money's yours. Rules are rules. Dutch had to stop reading for a minute after that one. And then, somewhere around 3 in the morning, on a page dated the previous spring, in that shaky failing hand, he found a note that wasn't about money at all. "Oh, 2 years back taxes now. County's sending letters. I'm too sick to work enough to catch up. I'm scared I'll lose the shop before you get out and then it'll all be for nothing. But I've got the savings, Dutch, our savings. I could pay the taxes with it and save the building. But that money's yours. It's the one thing I promised you. I can't touch it. I won't. I'd rather lose the walls than break my word to you." Dutch read that line 3 times. His brother, dying broke with the taxes coming due, had sat in this shop and chosen to lose the building rather than spend $1 of the money he'd promised his brother. He'd let the county take the walls to keep his word. Dutch closed the ledger. He knew what he had to do. At 6 the next morning, he was standing in the parking lot of the county courthouse waiting for the doors to open, the ledger under one arm and the fat old stack of envelopes under the other. He hadn't shaved. He hadn't slept. He looked like a man who'd been through a war, and in a way he had. When the clerk unlocked the front, Dutch walked straight to the tax window and set it all down on the counter. "I want to pay the back taxes on the Mercer property on Route 9, he said. The woman behind the glass blinked at him. "Sir, that property was auctioned. The sale closes today. Once it closes, you can't redeem it." "When does it close?" She checked the clock. "The buyer files the final paperwork at 9. Until he does, the previous owner's estate has a right of redemption. You pay the back taxes plus fees, the sale's void, but it has to be before he files, and you'd have to be the estate, next of kin." "I'm his brother," Dutch said. "Deacon Mercer, he's Wesley Mercer was." He slid the letter across the counter. The clerk read it. Her face changed. "How much?" Dutch said. "How much are the taxes?" She typed. Her fingers hesitated once and Dutch saw it and his gut dropped. Then she looked up. "With penalties and fees, $9,440. Dutch opened the ledger to the last page, where Wesley had kept the running total. 20 years of $12, $8, $20. The final number, written in that shaky hand, underlined twice. $19,211. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out the envelopes, and one by one he tore them open. Because that's what they were, not letters, cash. 20 years of cash folded into paper sleeves, a little in each one, dated and saved and hidden under a motorcycle seat. 5s and 10s and crumpled 20s, some of them so old they were the small face bills they stopped printing years ago. He counted it out on the counter. The clerk helped him. His hands weren't steady enough to do it alone. A line started to build behind him, people paying their water bills, but nobody complained. They just watched. There was something about the sight of a big, rough man in an old coat stacking 2 decades of grocery money on a county counter that made a room go quiet. It was all there. Every dollar Wesley said it would be. Dutch pushed $9,440 across the counter and kept the rest. "Pay it," he said, "all of it right now before 9. The clerk looked at the clock. It was 8:12. She looked at the money. She looked at the letter one more time. Then she picked up the phone and called her supervisor, and she said the words Dutch had been praying to hear. "We've got a redemption on the Route 9 parcel. Next of kin, paying in full, kill the sale." At 8:41, Dutch signed the last form. The property was his. The sale was dead. The suit in gray could file whatever he wanted at 9. There'd be nothing left to file on. Dutch drove the borrowed truck straight back to the garage and got there at 8:55. The flatbed was already in the lot. The 3 men in work vests were inside, and one of them had a socket wrench on the first bolt holding the chopper to the wall. Diesel was in the corner, hackles up, growling low, keeping them back from the bike with the last strength in his old body. "Off it," Dutch said from the doorway. The foreman turned. "You again. Look, I told you 8 o'clock, we got orders." "Orders are cancelled." Dutch held up the folded county deed. "This is my building. Redeemed the tax sale 40 minutes ago. Call your boss. Call the suit. Tell him the Mercer property isn't for sale, it never was, and if that wrench touches my brother's work one more time, you and I are going to have a conversation neither of us wants." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He was still the man people crossed the street to avoid. The foreman looked at the deed. He looked at Dutch. He looked at the old dog guarding the bike like it was the last thing on earth worth guarding, and he made the right call. "Pack it up," he told his men. "We're done here." The trucks pulled out for the last time, and then it was just Dutch and Diesel and the bike and the silence. Dutch walked over and put his hand flat on the gas tank, on that deep candy red his brother had mixed by hand to match a color from 20 years gone. He stood there a long while. The dog leaned into his leg. "We kept it, Wheeze," he said. His voice was rough and low and it barely made it out. "You hear me? We kept all of it." That afternoon Dutch drove up to the hill. It wasn't hard to find. A small county cemetery on a rise above the town, and near the back under a young maple, a flat stone still pale and new. Wesley Dean Mercer. And under the dates, a line the funeral home must have taken from somebody, because Dutch didn't know who else would have said it. He kept his word. Dutch stood at the grave with his hat in his hands. Diesel lay down in the grass beside the stone like he'd done it before, like he knew the way, and maybe he did. Dutch didn't say much. He wasn't a man of many words, and his brother had known that better than anyone. He just talked a little, the way you do. He told Wheeze he'd read every page. He told him the shakier the handwriting got, the harder it was to get through, and how he'd had to stop a few times. He told him the money was all there, down to the dollar, and that it had bought the building back just like it should have all along. He told him he was sorry. Sorry for the fight, sorry for the 20 years, sorry for every visit he'd assumed wasn't coming when maybe the letters just never made it through the walls. Then he told him thank you, and that was the hardest word of all. Diesel lived another 8 months, long enough to see the garage come back to life. Dutch reopened Mercer and Sons that spring. He kept the name. When people asked him why, since there was only one Mercer left and he wasn't anybody's son that mattered, Dutch would just point his chin at the ledger, which he kept on the counter by the register, open for anyone to read. Most of them read a page or two and got quiet and didn't ask again. He started saving $12 off the top of every job, put it in a coffee can on the shelf. He didn't know yet what it was for, but it felt wrong not to. Diesel spent his last months curled up on an old blanket by the workbench, watching Dutch turn wrenches the way he'd once watched a younger Mercer do the same. And when the old dog finally went quiet in his sleep, on a warm night with the shop doors open to the summer air, Dutch buried him up on the hill, right beside Wesley. Because Diesel had kept watch over that boy's whole life's work when there was nobody else left to do it, and the two of them belonged together. Dutch figured Wheeze would want the company. The rebuilt chopper never went back up on the wall. Dutch took it down, filled the tank, and rode it. Every Sunday. Up Route 9 and out past the roadhouse that wasn't a roadhouse anymore. Out where the road opened up, and the fields ran flat to the edge of the sky. He'd open it up and let it run, and he swore he could hear his brothers tuning in the way the engine sang, because Wheeze had always been able to make a dead thing come back to life. That first night, back at the very start when the door had buckled and the old dog had limped out of the dark, Dutch had frozen because he thought he was looking at a ghost. He wasn't. He was looking at the last living proof that somebody in this world had loved him enough to wait 20 years, feed a dog through 2 decades of winters, and rebuild a wreck bolt by bolt for a brother who might never come home. A man had walked into that garage with $40 and nothing to his name. He walked out the owner of a shop, a bike, a dog, and the whole weight of what his brother had done for him in the dark quietly for 20 years, expecting nothing back. That's what he found inside, and it changed everything.